Hello, I'm Andrea Parliament and wanted to provide a quick synopsis of how it is that I can reconcile the religious rights views with regards to homosexuality and same-sex marriage with some secular views on the same issue. Moral judgment is often summarized in the saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's a really great way that everybody sort of comes together and understands the basic underpinnings of moral judgment. Rational systems, legal systems, when they're putting together their justifications for the state intervening on a freedom of a citizen, have a slightly different expression of the same idea. And that is that the Crown has to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, two different elements of all crimes. There's a mens rea and a actus reus. And those two components reflect the idea that you can only be morally culpable when you are forming the mental intention to cause harm to others or to the public at large. What's interesting, though, is that when you shift from criminal law into human rights law, we're making a subtle change in who it is that we're talking about that doesn't have the element of choice with regards to the behavior, the prohibited behavior. So as we move on over, we're now talking about identifying a group characteristic and whether or not there's an element of choice with regards to that group characteristic. So when we were talking about who to include in the protection of charter rights here in Canada or the Bill of Rights in America, the question becomes is that usually the government will offer extension of protection against discrimination against immutable characteristics. So the legal test was whether or not sexual orientation was a choice or whether it was an immutable characteristic. And now we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about it on a group level. And what I'm suggesting is that I'm not suggesting that we came to the wrong conclusion, and I'm not suggesting that at all. I think we came to the right conclusion, but for the wrong reasons. In other words, we had a legal test that required it to be a mutable characteristic, and unfortunately, when you take a look at whether or not there's evidence of that, it's not clear. I'm not suggesting that even as a group, homosexuals have a choice with regards to their sexuality. It may be the case that that is a defining characteristic. What I'm suggesting is that we made a universal truth claim about human nature in order to be able to come to that conclusion. In order to be able to grant the protection to the gay and lesbian community, we made the assumption that sexual orientation is an immutable characteristic. And I think that we bent the facts in order to be able to pass the legal test to get to the right, just conclusion, as opposed to concluding that the legal test was wrong. And I think we need to back our way out of that, because when we go back to this idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, when we judge other people, we use our own personal experiences about our own nature to be able to determine if the other person that we're judging would have the same element of choice. So we project onto others our own personal experiences. And what I think is fundamentally wrong is that I think whether we're talking about a homophobe over here, who I think it's pretty clear has an element of choice with regards to their sexuality and is uncomfortable with that level of choice, wants to remain unconscious of that choice. And then we have over here a homosexual who may, and I think the evidence is clear, the majority of gay people do not have a choice with regards to their sexuality. The problem is that both sides are attempting to use their own subjective experiences about their own sexual orientation and project it onto the other. And that's what's wrong. So the homophobe is insinuating that the gay person has a choice, and that probably is not the case. And the homosexual is, because of the legal test, is making the conclusion, the universal claim, that nobody has a choice with regards to their sexuality. And I think that that is what is underlying the clash between the left and the right on how they see this issue of homosexuality. So, in other words, I am 100% agreeing that they deserve protection against discrimination, because sexual orientation is completely irrelevant to whether somebody can perform a job or receive an education and all of the rest of it that happens in the social sphere, in the public sphere. Now here's where I do my 180. So here I have concluded that we had a poor legal test and it's forcing a wrongful fact scenario, and what I think we're really fighting about is the concept of a universal human nature, and both sides are trying to claim it for their own respective purposes. Nothing to say that you both can't be right. That what we need is a more flexible understanding of sexual orientation. Okay, so now if we go back to this idea of do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, here's why I am for protecting the definition of a heterosexual marriage. And I do not believe that a same-sex marriage is equivalent. And therefore I think that there is wisdom in keeping the concepts somewhat separate in the public sphere. In my own personal experiences navigating my relationships, I have come to realize that when I did use that idea of do unto others as I would have them do unto me, and just when I thought that I was doing the most morally right thing, I often found myself in the deepest trouble. And I found that my efforts were certainly not appreciated. And that was because I was inappropriately using my own subjective understanding of how I wanted to be treated and assuming that the other person that I was in the relationship with wanted the same treatment. And that miscommunication has definitely happened far more frequently with men than with women for me. And I believe that the reason for that is that there are seriously different biological and psychologically different needs between men and women. Those biological differences include the ability to bear children, the ability to nurse children, being the first primary caregiver to a child, and then helping that child negotiate and move beyond your realm of influence, I think is a significant form of female power that men just don't have. Men obviously have physical power, and I think some other strengths, mental proclivities. I certainly know spatially I tend to be much poorer at that, and I know that I tend to be much stronger verbally. My point is that when you have a heterosexual relationship, you have an added layer of complexity due to biological hormonal differences between men and women that need to be negotiated in a different manner, because it's not a matter of degree. It's in some instances quite literally a different form of power that needs to be traded with another form of power. And that requires, I think, a lot of skill and a lot of understanding and a lot of modeling, because the most important thing that parents can do for their children is to teach them how to love, and most importantly, love across those differences. Learn how to identify signs that the other person doesn't want to be treated as you would like to be treated, and that you need to have a means by which you can negotiate and navigate those differences. And those differences are far more extreme in a heterosexual relationship. So it's not to say that gay relationships are not wonderful in their own right. They are. They're certainly not, though, equivalent. And I think that we would be losing something as a society if we pretended as if those differences did not exist. And so it's in defense of that I argue that we should be granting civil rights, full and complete civil unions and civil rights to same-sex couples, but preserve the idea of a marriage that's tied in with this idea of passing down to children. Just one last thing, children learn by watching, by imitating those that they love the most. And I think that if you were being raised by a same-sex couple, that they learn, but not to the same degree, not to the same extent. And I think that difference is worth noting. Thanks for listening.